and welcome back to Soccer Supernova with me, Amy Canavan. One of the latest shows being brought to you by A State of Mind. Today I'm absolutely delighted to be joined by Danny GALBRAITH. He was former Manchester United and he's currently at Hibernian Rovers, so it's quite the tale of a football career, isn't it, Danny? One extreme to the other.
That's some intro.
Absolutely.
Perhaps going the wrong way, it would have been better going the other way, but hey ho.
Absolutely. Well, you started off. Let's start off where it all began. And you're back where it did all start off at Gala. So you grew up in Gala. Was the dream always to be a footballer?
Yeah, I think so. I think funnily enough, Gala, there was no football when I was growing up. It was all rugby. So I was kind of went against the grain to a degree. Growing up, I think I was one of the only boys at my school that actually played football. We didn't have a school football team or anything like that. So I actually travelled to Edinburgh. I've got my parents and my family to thank for taking me up and down the A7 3-4 times a week for a number of years, just so I could play football. So I suppose when you're kind of sacrificing as much as that, or my family, as I should say, clearly that you want to have a kind of end goal of trying to make a career of it.
So where did that all start when you came up to Edinburgh? Where were you travelling through for?
Well, actually, my mum and dad divorced when I was young, and my mum moved to Edinburgh initially. So I went to school, I think, just towards the end of kind of primary one. So I was kind of 5 years old, and kind of my first friend at my new school, if you like, played for Hutchie Vale. We kind of had a few kick-arounds and played a bit at the school, and it was his dad that sort of said to me, come along. At that time I wasn't obviously aware of what Hutchie Vale was or stood for, and that was it for me. I then kind of signed there, and then from when I was 5 years old up until 14, that was my youth playing football, and at that time in between there I moved back to Gala. And then just used to travel. So yeah, kind of that was the one constant from Hutchie to until I left a number of years later. It was just up and down the road for Gala.
Hutchie is renowned for their youth setup and the players they sort of bring through. Was there anyone else coming through at that time alongside you?
Yeah, I mean we had a great kind of team at that age. Paul Hanlon, who has been my close friend and teammate for a number of years at Hutchie and then at Hibs. Paul Watson, who's at Dunfermline now, formerly Dundee United, Falkirk, etc. I think most of the actual team, Johnny Brown at Bonnyrigg was my teammate. So I think out of the kind of 7 or 8, 9 years that we had together, most players in the team played at a professional level in Scotland, at the very least. So we are very blessed to have so many kind of good players at that time. I've probably missed a few out, but
started the list.
Yeah, I know. So now we had a great team, and kind of Leith Athletic were our rivals throughout the whole time, and they had the likes of Lee Griffiths, Sean Welsh at Inverness, Lee Curry at Bonnyrigg. So kind of these are players, probably even at that time it was between us and them, winning the Scottish Cup. So we were probably the best teams, not just in Edinburgh but in Scotland. So it's kind of no surprise when you see the amount of players that have either went on to play professionally or are kind of still kicking about like myself.
Absolutely, you and Lee Curry still kicking around. So obviously through Hutchie Vale, and you get that move to Hearts. Down at Gala, it wasn't really a footballing town, so was Hearts a club you were really ever looking at, or?
I think basically what had happened at that time is kind of some of the players we've just spoken about had all started to go to youth initiative. My plan was to go to England, and at that time I knew there was interest. I'd been down to a few clubs, and I was fortunate that I kind of had a pick of most of the clubs down south at that time. But it got to the stage where as much as I owe everything to Hutchie and my coach Tam Smith, who kind of taught me everything I know probably. It was just getting to the stage where all the good players were leaving that level. So I felt for my own development I had to go and you kind of make that step and at least have a couple of years before, because I couldn't move to England till I was 16 anyway. So just before I was 14, had the decision. I actually was going to go to Rangers, but the issue there was that would have probably stopped me going down south a couple of years later. So Hearts was obviously closer. Being from Gala, I was only still going to Edinburgh as opposed to Glasgow. So all these kind of things came together, and I had a couple of years at Hearts before eventually moving on.
Obviously through Hutchie Vale, but then more through Hearts. We talk about it quite a lot on this show, that young kids sort of get fled into the academies at a really young age, and it hinders their career, maybe that they're not getting the same enjoyment at just playing with their friends. Do you think that, or obviously you're a product of exactly the opposite?
No, I agree with that, because for example, how many players now would you say still stay at their boys' club till they're 14 years old? It doesn't happen. Most players now, they're within a youth initiative set up, 7, 8, maybe younger than that. I think the thing for me was, it got to the point where I had to go because all the other players had left. To put into perspective, that year we won the Scottish Cup final 9-0, I think, or 7-0, 7 or 9-0. So, the competition had gone, and clearly I had to go and play against the better players in the country. But I was lucky because that was, when I was 14, I'd had 9-10 years of enjoying it, of playing football for the reason that you play when you first kick a ball, and that's because you love it, not because you want to get to 8-year-old and get a fancy Hibs or Hearts tracksuit and think you're a football player, because unfortunately that leads to more disappointments than not, and you can see the impact, I think personally, that has on a lot of kids, because they get sucked into the system, and as everybody knows, the actual percentage chances of progressing, to the first team at that club or any first team are so slim, that you're almost guaranteeing setting up kids for disappointment. And if you get, you hear the stories of the players who, maybe Andy Robertson released from Celtic, for example, and Champions League winner, Premier League winner, whatever, but that's a one in more than a million.
Yeah.
Most of the stories are the other way, and the impact it could have, especially as a kind of young boy, having your dreams shattered at an age where you probably don't have the understanding or realisation of how football actually works. Can be soul destroying, and it's no surprise we see so many players fall away. And I would always be, my advice is to stay with what you know and your boys' club as long as you can, because those are the, even now when I look back, those are probably the happiest times I had in football, because as I say, you just play football because you love it, not because you need to pay your mortgage or anything else that goes once you actually go into it as a full-time career.
So you've had that time through the enjoyment at Hutchie Vale, then you've had that taste of the real competitiveness and professionalism at Hearts, and then how did Man United come around? Obviously you've said that you had that option with all these English clubs earlier on in your life, but how did it become to be Man United?
That was my team, pure and simply. As I say, Gala is not a big football community, but my dad grew up in the George Best era, and I remember my first ever strip when I was 5 or 6 was the horrible grey away Man United strip with the sharp view cam on the front. I think Fergie made them take off at half time one game because that was blamed for their performance. So I think those are the memories. My kits when I was younger, birthdays, Christmas, I always wanted the Man United strip. Now clearly at that time I had no idea what was to follow. I think initially, the first club I went to down south was Ipswich, funnily enough. Paul Hanlon and Paul Watson, who I referred to earlier, the three of us went down, and it was a great experience. But then kind of the better we were doing, I suppose, the more you'd turn up to a game on a Sunday and you'd see every single jacket from the Premier League with scouts there. It was kind of every single week. I actually it was, I remember my mum and dad, after one game I was getting dropped off, and they as I was getting dropped off at my dad's house by my mum, and they said, "Oh, I've something to tell you," and that was the first time I really realised that, Man United are interested in signing you. and clearly growing up as a, it's funny because people think, oh, now I'm only a Man United fan because I was there, which is, complete nonsense. Anybody that knows me knows that kind of that. I never really, had a Scottish team. I followed Hearts because my best friend at school supported Hearts, but Man United was always my team. And I remember, I was actually supposed to go down to Chelsea. I'd been down to Chelsea once, but I was supposed to go and meet Mourinho was the manager at the time. And it was funny because my dad was telling me this not long ago, but Brendan Rodgers was a youth coach.
Right.
And my dad found his card in an old wallet. And he was saying to me, I remember I got a letter saying, I can't remember who they were playing, but I was going to go down to the game and meet Mourinho after it. And of course, I must have been 13, 14, and I'm, even as a Man United fan, oh, this is brilliant. And I remember my dad sat me down and he kind of said, so if you go down and you like it, would you like to go? And I said, no, of course not. I want to go to Man United. Well, you're not going then. So that was that. So from that point kind of onwards, there was only ever one place. And, my kind of dad was very much, you're not wasting anybody's time. Whereas, I was just like in awe of this experience and going and, the potential to go and look at these clubs, etc. Even though, in my heart, I was only ever going to go one place. And thankfully when I was eventually kind of offered the opportunity to go, it was kind of once in a lifetime opportunity.
Absolutely. So you go from getting Man United football strips for your birthday to signing the contract on your birthday. What sort of moment is that?
It was a great moment. Of course it was at the time, because I couldn't sign officially till I was 16, and my birthday was in the August, but obviously I moved in July, so I couldn't play any games or anything. But I'd moved down. I'd actually been going kind of 2 weeks on, 2 weeks off in preparation during my exams, and I was doing some kind of schoolwork down there, just to kind of bed in, being away from home, etc. But none of that really kind of bothered me, to be honest. So kind of my 16th birthday was when I officially signed. We played the game. We actually played Ipswich that day, which is funny having been there previously. So it was obviously a great experience to sign, and I had 3 years there. Obviously, that looking back now, we're kind of filled with more disappointments than good times, I suppose, because of the kind of injuries I went through and the time I missed. But the day of when it all starts is obviously one with a good memory, one I'll never forget.
Absolutely. And one of the other, it's probably a low given the result, but one of those highs was the FA Youth Cup final.
Yeah.
30,000 in the Emirates, and how old are you? You're 16, 17?
16, yeah.
That's crazy at that age to be playing in front of that size of a crowd.
It was. I actually think that is still the record today of the most, the biggest capacity or the biggest attendance at a youth game. And that was the semi-final. We played Arsenal and we were down for the first leg in London. And it was like, I think on the morning there was about 20,000 tickets sold, and we were like, wow, this is amazing. And as the day got on, it just got like more and more and more. And obviously then you turned up for the game, and the Emirates was brand new. It was the first year it was open, and you kind of had three tiers, and the bottom two tiers were all full, as you say, 38,000, 16 years old, and it was just an amazing experience. It really was. Because you think, some players could play, unless you're playing in the Premier League or you're playing against Celtic or Rangers in Scotland, you probably never play in front of that many fans. So to do that at that age, you probably kind of took for granted. And thankfully we won that game, and then won the return leg at Old Trafford, and then we had the same kind of two-legged affair against Liverpool in the final. And again, I think there was maybe 20,000 odds at Anfield and then at Old Trafford. So although we lost on penalties, that was the kind of the disappointing factor. But I suppose actually experiencing that, it's not until I suppose you look back that you realise what a great experience it was.
Absolutely, and you touched on it, that how many of these guys who go through the academy do actually make it. Now you look at that final, and it's Liverpool and Man United, and you look at it, and really not many have made it to the top. Obviously, there's Danny Welbeck and Danny Drinkwater, who you played alongside, James Chester. Do these guys stand out or outside everybody else, or do you think it is just one of those, it's luck if that path falls in front of you?
To be honest, you would never notice, because all the players are capable. You know, that's the thing. And it's easy for me to sit here and say, well, I know you're just lucky. Obviously, that there's more to it than luck, but you need luck. There's no doubt about that. You know, without the luck, things don't happen. It's just, you know, it's as simple as that. Tom Cleverley, for example, played left back in that team because we didn't have a left back, and then went to play on as a central midfielder for England. So you know, it just kind of shows you. And you know, Tom, for example, was kind of nowhere kind of near probably some of the other midfielders, Danny Drinkwater, for example. But one summer got a late call up to a pre-season tour, ended up coming on for 10 minutes and scoring a goal, and then the next minute, you know, he got more minutes and a couple of good loan moves later, and the next minute he's a regular in the first team, as he was, you know, before Ferguson left. So I think everybody has their own story, but clearly, you know, if you're playing for one of the top academies in the country, you know, it's probably not down to talent. You have players who are exceptional. You know, Danny Welbeck was a standout, I should say, to be, you know, in fairness. He was probably the one player who you thought, you know, has something different. And, you know, he's another one who, unfortunately, you know, has kind of been shoehorned into a player that he never really was. He was like, you know, he was so technical that that's what made him stand out. Whereas you look at him now and people kind of look at his physical attributes, perhaps more than, you know, his ability. But again, another one whose kind of injuries have halted him, and you know that could be seen as bad luck. Whereas, you know, others who potentially, you know, weren't as talented as him have had better careers.
Absolutely. So when you're in that academy, what's the connection like to the first team, like with Sir Alex? And do you feel that there is a progression to that first team side?
Definitely there was. I mean, and that's the one thing that separated Man United from every other club that I did visit. You know, growing up, you know, the one thing that stood out was that everything was together. You know, most clubs, you had the academy on one side of the building, or perhaps another building, and then the first team, and it was very much, you know, you're nowhere near the first team until you get to the first team. Whereas Man United was the opposite. It was, you know, we all ate together. You know, our changing rooms were, you know, 10 yards from one another, so we're always integrating, you know, in the corridors, in the canteen, in the gym. So, you know, it was very much that, you know, you're here to take their place, and that's obviously the way that Sir Alex, you know, made the club. Because I know it's not like that now. So, you know, I suppose the difference is when you have, you know, one man really in control of everything. There definitely was a kind of different feel to it, you know. And people always talk about Sir Alex and how he knew everybody from the kind of top to the bottom, and their names, their families' names. And that's true. You know, that's the one thing I can absolutely stand behind, is he did. And you always felt like you had a chance, because Man United have always given young players chances. So even though you're probably going to the biggest club in the world, you know, I think it's different probably if you go to Chelsea or you go to Man City, or you know, back then some of the bigger clubs, because they didn't really have a history of bringing players through. You know, so even though they were the best team, they were probably a team that you had equally as good a chance of breaking through it if you were good enough, and if you took your opportunity, because, you know, it happens so often.
You genuinely, did have a good relationship with Sir Alex? Yeah,
I think he was always good to me because I was Scottish as well, clearly, because, you know, there was only a few of us, you know, myself, David Gray, Darren Fletcher were only three players, and there was quite a few Scottish members of staff. So that was another kind of thing that made you sort of feel at home. And I think, you know, clearly we always had a kind of a bit sort of banter with the fact that we're Scottish, and especially, you know, in you know, perhaps Celtic Rangers games and things. Even though I was never a supporter of the two, there was always you know, kind of Scottish boys having a laugh and a joke about that, because we obviously kind of grew up local to that.
Absolutely. Now we know, obviously, one way that your career hasn't quite panned out is due to injuries, and that started from a very young age, even while at Manchester United. What were the facilities like, and how was it for that recovery?
Oh, I was definitely, you know, I couldn't have been in a better place. You know, for example, you know, there was certainly no. It's not until you leave somewhere like that you realise, you know, what it could have been, because it was bad while I was there, and I had, you know, everything state of the art at my fingertips. So, you know, when you go kind of down the leagues and you can't get a scan and you can't get, to the bottom of what's wrong. That's kind of the real difficulties. So, I think at that time clearly I had a lot of problems, and I think within probably, I think I was just before my 17th birthday, I had an ankle operation from an injury I picked up playing for Scotland. That was a kind of funny story. When I went away there, and I'd done my ankle in training, I ended up playing in a game, and when I got back, Sir Alex absolutely went through me in front of everybody. Basically saying, you're here for us, not for anybody else. And that was probably a wake-up call a wee bit to think, because again at that age, you say, I want to go and play for Scotland. You think it's kind of the be-all and end-all, when it's probably not. So yeah, I think from that point, I then had an operation on my ankle just before I was 17. I think I maybe had 3 or 4 months out, and just as I was about to come back, I'd done my knee, and I had another operation. So that was 2 within probably 4 or 5 months. I'd been out for maybe 8 or 9 months, and as I came back from that, I had this problem in my groin, and I was thinking, like, it cannot be anything wrong with me because I've not played. And you just try and push through it, and I got to the point where I just couldn't do it anymore. And then 10 months later, I've had another double groin surgery, and 2 years have passed and my contract's up. So it kind of just flew by as quick as that. I had kind of 3 operations and probably 5 to 10 injections along the way in a period of less than a couple of years. So no, looking back, that was a difficult time because I didn't play any football really, and that's what you're there for. So when I was never homesick or kind of worried about things like that, but when you're not able to do what you want to do and what you're there to do, I think that's when the sort of difficult moments come in, and you first understand the sort of kind of loneliness. Being injured in football is difficult to deal with, particularly when it's such a long period of time. It always makes me laugh when people suggest that people are maybe feigning injury or whatever, and I'd understand maybe at Christmas if somebody's got a tight hamstring and they miss a game, but trust me, when you've been injured for 6 months, 8 months, 12 months at a time, you're not doing that unless there's physically impossible for you to play, because as anybody would tell you, there is no worse thing in football than being injured. I'm absolutely sure of that.
So at 17, 18, you're already going through this ridiculously tough period. Have you already maybe began to fall out of love with football a little bit?
Perhaps. I think I never fall out of love with football, and intentionally, because I've always loved football, but I think it just becomes a chore. It's not anything you want to walk away from, but everything just becomes you're mentally draining, because it's just constantly. You're in the gym, all your teammates are out training, they're all having a laugh, you're on your own, they're leaving at 12, 1 o'clock, you're still there at 4 o'clock, and it's it's a horrible experience, to be honest, when it goes on for that length of time, and you wouldn't wish that on anybody. So to have done it as many times as I've done it, I must have had some form of love for it to keep going for as long as I did, because when I look back now and think, dearie me, what was I doing that for? So no, I think when you look back at these things, but at the time you're always trying to stay positive and get yourself back playing for the highs, because the highs are as high as anything, but unfortunately the lows are also really low, and for me personally, I had a lot more of those moments than the good ones.
Absolutely. So you did persevere through that love. Maybe love wasn't the right word, maybe enjoyment. So did you really find that when you went up to Hibs? Was it Paul Hanlon that sort of turned you over there?
A little bit, because obviously Paul was one of my closest friends, and it was a kind of the choice between going back to Hearts or going to Hibs, and probably naturally it would have been easier to go to Hearts, but kind of the main, and obviously I knew Paul at Hibs, and Paul had made his debut. These are other things where you're thinking, I'm at Man United, the biggest club in the world. I was in the reserves at the time, but you see one of your best mates playing in a first team, and you think, even though you're at Man United, I want to play in a first team, and that's when you start to think, football in terms of a career is about playing man's football and being in a first team. And kind of Paul was obviously a an influence. But Donald Park was the assistant manager at the time, who was my coach at Scotland, and he was the real reason, to be honest. Him and Mixu was the manager, but Donald particularly, throughout my whole career, I've never probably played under somebody who I felt could get as much out of me as Donald. I think he just had a way, whether it was probably with everybody, because of how kind of infectious his personality is, but whether he thought I was any good or not, he made me feel like I was probably the best player in the world. So that was the real reason, because I felt that he particularly could have a positive effect on me. And as luck would have it, I signed, and then within a couple of weeks, him and Mixu left. So I never actually got to spend a day with him. So that was a real disappointment, because as I say, he was probably one of the kind of top of the list of reasons why I wanted to go to Hibs.
So you get thrown right in at the deep end, Danny, then, and you do make your debut pretty soon on at Hibs, that professional debut that you have been longing for. How big a moment was that for you?
Yeah, it was a big moment. I suppose that's the reason why I went to Hibs, was to play in the first team. It was the first game of the season, St Mirren at home. Actually, I think I came on for Paul Hanlon at left back, of all things. So not my expected position, but I managed to set up a goal, and we won. So it was probably the perfect debut, if that's what you want to call it, for that point of view. But for me, that was just kind of that's what I was there for. That's kind of why I wanted to go and experience moments like that. So I think looking back, the first game is obviously one that you remember.
As the first goal that you score, and against Celtic, of course. Thanks for that. How big a moment was that then?
I'm still trying to forget about it, because it gets brought up at it was actually on my dad's birthday, so that's probably the main reason I'll never forget it. But every year Celtic normally play Hibs about that time, and how they've never managed to beat them since, I'll never know. But clearly for me, that was a big moment, because to score the winning goal at Celtic Park, that is probably something that you dream of when you're a boy. And for me, I'll always say it's a funny moment for me, because it probably should have been a great moment, but the way I look back on it now, it's probably more negatively, because nothing really happened from that. I tell everybody this, but I think I must be, and obviously I'm not absolutely certain, but I would put good money on it that I think I'll be the only player to ever score the winner at Celtic Park and then get dropped after it. So it's easy to laugh and joke about it now, but as I say, it was my dad's birthday, end of January, and I didn't even make the bench for 2 months after that. So I went from scoring the winner on an absolute high to not even making the bench and sitting in the stand. And I think when you look at people's career and you look at kind of key moments, and luck obviously is a huge part of it, and when I look at my career, that really was a moment where I had to kick on, and unfortunately I had that taken away from me, and that's a hard one to take, because as a young player, you're never going to be more confident and probably more motivated than I was at that time, particularly having been through what I'd been through in terms of injuries, and taking a new start, and it had been a frustrating kind of 6 months up to that point in terms of not playing as much as I wanted to, and then eventually you think, right, here we go, I have to play now, there's nothing more I can do. I think we were close to second in the league, if not second at the time, and obviously had a great start to the season, and then clearly you come on in a game like that, you score, and you think, right, here we go, now's the time to kick on, and it kind of just fizzled out, because before I knew it, it was kind of March, end of the season, and I'd hardly kicked the ball after that. And it's, again, you look back at key moments and you think, they're the things that you need to go in your favour, and unfortunately for me, that never transpired.
How deflating was it? Because you come from Man United, and there's that clear pathway to the first team now. If you grab your opportunity, then that's you. Now, you grabbed that opportunity at Hibs, and then John Hughes really does just tear the rug away from the bottom of your feet. Yeah,
but it was like that for day one under John Hughes for me, for whatever reason. As I say, I think it was a strange situation, because I'd signed for Hibs to play for Mixu and Donald, Then in the off season, they got removed from their duties. John Hughes was appointed, and then the first day of pre-season, I turn up as a new player with a new manager. And the thing is, I think, like, if you didn't want me, for example, why didn't you just tell me and I kind of avoid all that? But I don't think that was the case. But that clearly there was been moments in years gone by where you try and kind of square this off in your own mind, and the only thing I can think is that he had this perception, clearly wrongly, that I was coming from Man United, so I needed to be knocked down a peg or two. Never mind that I was actually the boy who had 2 years of hell and who was at rock bottom and just wanted to get back enjoying football. And I think anybody who knows me would tell you that I'm no one to get carried away. I'm no one that gets ahead of myself. I'm particularly level-headed, and I've never kind of thought that I've made it or anything like that. I've worked as hard as anybody, and particularly given the things that I'd been through to kind of keep going. So when you go through all that, and then you kind of are desperate to, because I was never one to, kind of spit the dummy out. So there's plenty of occasions, particularly under John Hughes, where other players would have just put up with that, where they would have said, right, I'm away, or I was always one, well, no matter how kind of much I'm frustrated, I just get my head down and keep working. I need to work harder, and that was probably to my detriment as well, because he kind of had me like a puppet on the end of his fingers, and I never used to take days off. I'd be in every Wednesday. I'd do extra after the match, everything, because I was desperate to play. Now, I'd stay after training every day, and then the problem you have there, though, is that when you're doing all these extra things, the minute you don't do that, it looks like you're the one skiving, whereas you're doing more than anybody anyway. And he always had that way of, I remember going to speak to him once and saying, what more do I need to do? And his kind of the feedback was, would you have played this many games in Man United's first team? And I was thinking to myself, well, no, because I'm not at Man United. And I'd be competing against Ronaldo and Wayne Rooney and Nani and Ryan Giggs, but as a young boy, you just nod your head and you leave, and then you think, I'm quite an analytical person, and when things don't add up, it's hard to get your head around it, but you realise quick enough that that's football. Things are, logic necessarily doesn't apply, and things like that. You kind of hitting your head against a brick wall, really, and that's certainly what it felt like for me. And clearly there was no more. If there was ever a moment where I had to be given an opportunity, it was then. And it wasn't just me, as I say. I'm not just saying that because I was the one that kind of felt hard done by. I mean, when you're young, you look at all these things online, even though it's not as big as it is now, but kind of fans forums and the rumours that were going about that I turned up drunk to training, and that was one of them, which was funny because I was teetotal. I never had a drink until I was 26, which was on my stag do, funnily enough. So when you're kind of as professional as anybody could possibly be, and you're hearing that you turned up drunk, or you were late to training, or you done this or you done that, because I think genuinely people were surprised. Why is he not playing? And nobody was more surprised than me, but that's just the way it was. And as I say, I was never one to question, and maybe I should have been. When I look back now, I always think it's the players that make the most noise that actually get places, because managers just don't want the hassle. If you've got a guy like myself who do whatever you want to him, but he'll turn up, he'll be professional, he'll train right, and he'll never be a problem to me. Whereas if you get a guy who you drop on 1 week and he's chapping your door and kicking balls away in training, they just think, well, do you know what? That's too much hassle. Let's just play him. And I think probably that went to my detriment. But I think you have to as well, especially when I look back now on obviously a former career, I think it's important to have, morals, and to have, a degree of being able to look yourself in the mirror and say, well, do you know what? I couldn't have done any more. And thankfully that's, my football career, when I look back on it, it's nothing but, disappointment. People would say to me, I don't think I achieved anything in football, and I certainly never achieved anything close to what I set out to achieve. So for me, it's one massive disappointment. But the only thing that does give me a little bit of reassurance is the fact that, you know, I gave it everything. I couldn't have done any more. As I say, I didn't drink alcohol till I was, you know, 26 years old. I was the fittest I could have been, you know, at all times, and probably pushed myself too far, and that's why I had so many injuries, I think, because I just, you know, I couldn't take days off. I felt like I was always having to prove myself, and eventually you probably go too far. And I think, you know, if I was to give kind of my younger self advice, it would, you know, I should have relaxed more. I should have went and had a, you know, a drink on a Saturday night, and, you know, you don't need to get kind of out your face, but you can go and enjoy and switch off, because I could never switch off. You know, I'd be going out with my friends. Obviously, I didn't drink, so I'd drive all my pals out. They'd have a drink. I'd sit, you know, in the nightclub thinking about this pass or this shot or this cross, and, you know, for me it was far too full on, and that was just my personality. So I think in ways it worked against me, but by the same token, you know, at least I can look myself in the mirror and say, you know, I never ever wanted to be one of these people that say, oh, I could have been this. You know, if I didn't find drink, or if I didn't go out too much. And, you know, you hear the stories. Everybody, you go into a pub, no now obviously because you're not allowed, but you know, I remember growing up saying I never want to be one of those people that say I could have done more, if only I'd done this, if only I'd done that. And I suppose the only criticism I'd have of the way I was is that I probably done too much at times, and, you know, I probably should have relaxed a bit more. But, you know, that was just how desperate I was to as I say, you know, have a career that, you know, I set out to have, which, you know, in the end I was nowhere near.
It is easier said than done, and with hindsight it's easy. It's great to look back and go, oh, I should have relaxed, should have done this. You touched upon there that it's the headlines that come out, oh, he's drunk, he's not fit, he's not this, he's not that. Did that bring around then the general disappointment at how Hibs came to an end as well? Obviously, surrounding the Scottish Cup final, there was a lot of headlines about what you were up to and whatnot. And does that just sort of epitomise everything then up until that point?
It does, yeah. I mean, the Scottish Cup final was an absolute disgrace. I mean, you know, the background to that was the night before the cup final. Bearing in mind, there was a squad of 25 in the hotel the night before. I'll never forget this, and it's just kind of sums football up. And myself and Graham Stack were the two injured players in the squad, 25 of us. And the night before the game, we're on the hotel, and kind of I got told that, you know, basically there was going to be a bonus pot if we won the game. Now, how this was not organised weeks before, I'll never know. But anyway, basically, to cut a long story short, what had been agreed by the manager was that everybody, you know, clearly the players that were playing, the 11 that were playing, and the six, I think 5 or 6, or 5 subs, it must have been 16, they were all taken care of. But for the other 9 players in the squad, if we won, the club would put a pot together. And what they decided was that rather than splitting it between 9 of us equally, they would split it between 7, and myself and Graham Stack would go into a pot with the bus driver, the physio, the kit man, the kit woman, and somebody else. There was a few members of staff. So of course, immediately you feel isolated, because you think to yourself, well, you know, why? You know, at the end of the day, all 9 of us were going to have no bearing on the game, and if we had won the game, it was nothing to do with us, clearly, because we were all in the stand. You know, and you obviously think to yourself, well, you know, for example, Stacky particularly, he had played in every single game and got injured in the semi-final. You know, I'd played in an earlier round and set up the winning goal against Cowdenbeath in one of the early rounds. Not that matters, but, you know, if you were going to do it, well, whoever's played the most, you know, for example, if that was the way. But it wasn't that. It was just for us. It was, well, either everybody gets the same or everybody gets nothing. And for me, that's pretty, you know, obvious. So, no, I'd kind of spoke to Stacky about it, and he was obviously fuming. And I wouldn't have said nothing if it was just me, clearly, but he was saying, I'm away to speak to the manager. And of course, I'm there thinking, well, it's just me and him. Should I let him go on his own? Or, you know, and I'm thinking, well, it's not a conversation I would have, but I almost look kind of like I'm getting him to fight my battles, I suppose. So I said, do you want me to come with you? And he just said, I'm not bothered, come if you want. So I kind of felt, listen, I have to when it's just us. So, you know, he goes and gets Pat Fenlon. Pat, what's going on? I mean, why are we being treated differently? And he said, oh, it's a difficult one to keep everybody happy. And Stacky said, well, no, it's not. You either give everybody the same or everybody nothing. Because Stacky, I spoke to a few of the boys, and I went, what do you think of this? And they were going, that's a joke. And you know, the thing is, it had nothing to do with money. It was just the fact that we were getting treated. It was a principle, of course it was. I mean, how can you treat two players the same as the bus driver? And that's not being disrespectful to the bus driver. You know, it was nothing to do with, you know, the staff shouldn't be taken care of. Of course not. It was the fact that, you know, effectively, boys who were sitting watching the game were getting 5 times more than what we were because we were injured. And, you know, as I say, nobody wants to be injured. That is an absolute fact. So anyway, Kenny Stacky sort of said that, well, you just give everybody nothing or give everybody the same. All right, no, that's fair enough. And that was that. So, of course, the game goes on, and clearly it was a momentous day in terms of the 5-1, so obviously it wasn't a good day for the club. And the ironic thing is nothing mattered because we got beat anyway. So, but as I say, it was nothing to do with money. It was to do with the fact that we were being isolated. So anyway, that was a Saturday. So clearly the season finishes, but myself and Stacky were still in for treatment over the summer because we were injured. So it's another thing, if you're injured, you don't get your summer holidays. So why anybody would want that? But so I'll never forget, I was in the changing room, and bearing in mind, Stacky had got injured in the semi-final. So Pat had said to him, listen, you've been my number one all season, and he had a bad injury with his thigh, and he was going to be out for a while. So he'd said to him, you know, go and take your summer holiday now. This was like April time. Get away with your family. You know, your contract's sorted. I want you to stay. Clearly, you've played most of the games for me. So Stacky goes away, and 2 days after the final, comes into the changing room, and you know, Pat had said to him, oh, things have changed, and basically ripped his deal away from him, said, I'm not giving you a new contract anymore. So Stacky was a wee bit kind of none the wiser at the time. And then the next day, called me in and said, oh, things have changed with too many young players at the club. You can leave now. And I said, well, I'm injured. And he went, right, well, once you're fit, you can leave. And I said, well, what happens if I've not got something else? I said, you know, at this point, I'd been out for maybe 6 or 7 months, so it wasn't an insignificant amount of time again. So anyway, that was that. You're not really thinking straight at the time, and that's that. And that, for me, I had bigger issues in terms of getting fit. So that was that. And then the kind of weeks went by, and we got to the end of the window, and you know, I tried to force me out the door, and I'm thinking, you know, this is strange. And then it got to, I mean, I was saying to my agent, you know, what's going on? Why are they doing this? And you know, I could never get an answer. Eventually, I got a meeting with the chairman, and you know, at this point, I was kind of at breaking point because I'd been told at the end when I didn't accept to leave, they made me stay away, so I wasn't allowed to go to training. So I had to sit in my house and go to the gym myself. And bear in mind, I was still injured at the time, so I was doing my own rehab. I was paying to go and see my own physios, even though I was under contract. I mean, it was just terrible. It really was. And eventually, I got a meeting with my agent and kind of Rod Petrie at the time, who's not an easy person to speak to. And no, I kind of pleaded with him and said, you know, would you do this to your own son? Like, why are you doing this to me? I've never done a thing wrong. I've never had a moment's bother. I've never been in trouble. I've never had a fine. I've never had a warning. I've never had anything. You know, why are you doing this? And he kind of just kept saying, oh, it's a medical decision. And I thought, what do you mean? And you could never get an answer. And then eventually he said, well, it's up to the manager. So I said, well, because Pat never used to turn up to the meetings. He was supposed to come. He wouldn't come. And then eventually I got to sit down with him in about the October time. And anyway, and as I say, I'm not a confrontational person, but I got to the point, I just said, kind of point blank, why are you doing this to me? And he went, do you know why I'm doing it? Because you came and asked me for money the night before the Scottish Cup final. I was like, and obviously I was taken aback at this. I went, what do you mean? I was like, it was nothing to do with that. It was the fact that you were trying to isolate me. And no, that wasn't the case. And nobody will ever do that. And clearly, because we got hammered, that's why. You know, obviously he had to endure the Hearts fans singing whatever they were singing during the game, and you know, decided to go on he kept saying it's a manager's prerogative. I can do what I want to do, and of course he can. So there's not really much you can do about that. And I asked, well, can I come in and at least try and get fit? Because at this point I just wanted away. You know, it was hell. I wasn't allowed to go at the games. I wasn't allowed to go to training. You then have the rumours again that, you know, I think something broke, that I'd been suspended. And obviously that I made sure the club issued a statement to say that I hadn't, you know, done anything, and it was nothing to do with disciplinary matters, because, you know, how difficult is that then, when, because people believe what they read in the press, of course they do. And, you know, you just think, how can this possibly happen to me when I lived the life that I did? You know, I lived like a saint, really, to be honest, and never caused anybody a moment's problem. And yet I'm stuck at my house, suspended for the club, and, you know, people in football talk, and, you know, rumours start. So it was just a horrible time, and eventually said, right, you can come in and train with a physio, but only when everybody's away. So bear in mind, this is getting to late October, so I had to go in at 3 o'clock, and it was getting dark by like 4. So I was going in, and then I wasn't even allowed a ball, so I went to buy my own football for Sports Direct to take with me. And honestly, see, when I look back now and think, like, thank God I have nothing to do with football anymore. But you think back now and think, how did that go on? So there I'd run around and do my kind of exercises with the physio until it went dark, and then I'd need to go home, and same again the next day. So I'd done that for a couple of weeks. And I remember I come and saying to me and said, Falkirk want to take you on loan. And basically said, you need to go. I said, well, I'm not going. I said, like, I've been sat at home for at least 2 months, and I've had 2 weeks playing kickabout with the physio. I was like, I'm not turning up to a club who will be paying some of my wages when I'm in this situation. I said, if you let me train for a few weeks and at least know that I'm confident within my body that I'm fine, then I'll go. Fine. So the answer was no. And then, I asked if I could train with the youth team. He said no, and then that was it. I walked out 2 weeks later. And was back to being stuck at home again. So that was another probably 2 months, or maybe more than that, because as these things always happen, you get to the very last minute or the very last day of the window in January, and by that point, I said, unless I get paid what I'm due, and I mean every penny, I'm not moving, because at this point I'd ruined my life. It was hard being injured, but that on top of that was particularly difficult. And again, I'm quite a positive person, but even at that time, mentally it was torture, and just to get away. And that's probably why I then went to Ireland, because I was so kind of scunnered by what I'd been through, and it was a Scottish manager had just got the job over there, and I kind of said, listen, he was desperate to sign me, and just to have somebody who wanted you, having been through what I'd been through, was like, I'll go to Timbuktu if I need to. So that's why I just thought, I just need away from here and just try and get some sanity back in my life, and to try and play for somebody for once who's actually signed me, because that never happened at Hibs. So that kind of is how it came about, and went over there and had got back to actually enjoying playing again.
You go over there in the press, and your manager as well, they're highlighting you as this top class professional, model professional, and it just shows you that there's two sides to everything, and really there was always only just the one side in the press.
There is, and I think again that's why I can look myself in the mirror, because anybody that knows me knows my character, and that's the one thing. people have an opinion on me as a footballer, whether they might think I'm good, bad, and indifferent. That's life. But what I think most people would agree is, of my professionalism, the way I looked after myself, the way I conducted myself, more importantly, because I wasn't brought up to spit my toys, or to spit my dummy out, or throw my toys out the pram. And actually, when I look back and think how I was able to do that for so long, I don't know. But I suppose, as I say, it's the one thing I can kind of look back and say, well, I always had my own integrity and stuck to what I believe in, which is, no kind of falling by the wayside. And you see that so many times, and there's a number of times, particularly that could have happened to me, where I just thought, what, it is what it is, I'll go and do something daft or whatever. But thankfully I never managed to do that, which has probably helped me in my career after football, because people are aware of, most importantly, the type of person I am.
Absolutely. So you take that step almost back down to Ireland then, and then you do get that move to England. Now, obviously that's where you want to be stay away from Scotland, and you get that move. Did you feel then maybe going to Gillingham, it was going to be the start of something again, or was it just the sake of?
No, that really did. Again, it's funny because it seems like there's a but every time. But no, that is another example where Peter Taylor was the manager. He had obviously managed England 21s. I think he actually managed England and gave Beckham the captaincy for the first time. So he'd managed in the Premier League, and to have somebody of that calibre in terms of what he'd achieved in football, wanting to sign you was massive. But I signed in kind of December time, and then on Hogmanay got sacked. So I think I played one game, and it was just like, here we go again, the whole Hibs scenario that you finally think you stumble across something. And no, Peter Taylor was great, and again, a big regret, much like Donald Park. I would have loved to have played for him, and it was nothing to do with football either. I think Peter was a pretty sure of his opinion, and he'd had the chairman lived in Dubai, and it was something to do with, I think the Peter phoned the chairman looking to make some plans for the window opening on the 1st of January, and I think the story was that the chairman said, I'm busy organising my New Year party, I'll speak to you tomorrow type thing. And I think Peter was just the type of guy, old school, that went, I'm not having this. So he walked away, and as I say, we were doing okay at the time, so it was nothing to do with results or anything, which made it even more frustrating. So then you're in the same situation again, where you've just turned up at a new club with no kind of track record there. And there's a new manager coming in, and as is often the case, you feel that way, that you're kind of last in, first out. It happens a lot because you're the previous manager's signing, and that's how it kind of proved to be.
It was, and then obviously Justin Edinburgh came in, and things just didn't really work out at Gillingham. So then it's York. What happens at York?
I mean, I think things can't get any stranger, but they certainly could. So again, York, similar situation. I'd been out of contract for a number of months, so that was 4 or 5 months with no income, just trying to survive, waiting for another opportunity. And there was things, my ambition in football was always to play at the highest level. So every decision I made was due to that. It was nothing. I never once made a decision in my whole career to do with money, and I had offers, to go certain places, but I felt like if I'd done that, that would probably be the end of it in terms of you're just surviving. You're not actually trying to achieve anything. So I waited it out, and then obviously York came about with Jackie McNamara, and clearly I was aware of Jackie's. Clearly never left on great terms at Dundee United, but I'd had friends who had played for him, who spoke highly of him, and he was a manager who was kind of renowned for playing good football and playing with young players. So I felt it was another good opportunity for those reasons. So went there, and clearly the club were kind of struggling at the time, which is why a new manager comes in. But that just turned into an absolute disaster. I think the day I signed with 5 other boys on loan, and that was a Friday, and we all started the next day. It was like turning up the first day at school to the game, and you're playing with guys you've never, you've barely shook their hand, and played Accrington, and I got absolutely hammered. I think it was 5-1, and it was like, well, this is going to be difficult. And clearly Jackie had a model of bringing young players, and it got to the January, and I remember signing, and I think my shirt number was 37, and that was about the first available number. So that tells you how many players had been and gone over the course of that first 6 months. And again, a bucket load came in on loan, guys with no experience from decent clubs, kind of a couple from Newcastle, Burnley, a few other clubs, but were just young lads who had never played men's football before. And I think to go into that environment, and particularly having done that at Dundee United, but it's a different type of football, and in the Scottish Premiership there's more football, whereas League Two is very much physical. It's difficult pitches. It's probably not conducive to a young, free-flowing football team, and it just never worked. And it was just kind of the confidence just drained. And again, boys who had never experienced this, there wasn't enough kind of probably experienced guys in the team Again, guys like myself coming in, having, basically been training myself for 5 months, and it just turned into a kind of a downward spiral, and that was a horrible experience because I think we played Portsmouth, who were, I think, going for the league at the time at home in the last few games, and we beat them 3-0, and we played unbelievable, and it was just like the one game and everything clicked, and everything that the coaching staff probably wanted came together, and all of a sudden it gave us a bit of hope, and then I think the next game we had to win to stay up, and it was just back to how it would been. I think we lost the first goal and kind of fell apart. So to kind of get relegated was horrible. And then going into the next season, of course, things got even worse, and kind of the fans weren't happy with Jackie, and it was just a really kind of horrible environment at the games. And I remember one game we played Guiseley, who were like a kind of part-time team, but I don't think they'd won a game all season, but they were our closest rivals in terms of location. It was kind of like a derby, but both the clubs had probably not competed at the same level. And there was about 700 York fans went, which for that sort of level was a big following. We probably had more fans there than them, but they were all there to see us get beat. I mean, that environment was toxic, it really was. And we went 1-0 up, and we're thinking, right, here we go. And then we ended up losing 6-1, but we were 4-1 down at maybe 40 minutes, and the floodlights went off. So we had to go into the changing room for an hour, and like we were all thinking like the game's got to get called off, and obviously we wanted it called off because we were getting hammered. But sod's law, they managed to find an electrician. We've been in the changing room for an hour, go out, we had to play the last 5 minutes of the first half, then come back into the changing room again, and then play the second half, and that was a bad experience. And then I think it came out in the press then that Jackie sort of said, listen, if we don't win on Saturday, I'll step down. And that was kind of strange for our manager ever to say that. And we played away and we ended up drawing. We'd done a bit better. It wasn't great. Drew the game, and that was it. And obviously Jackie stepped down, and then 5 minutes later was the chief executive and the boss of the new manager. So it was, I mean, you think you've seen it all, and then that happens, and you're in a situation where the old manager's in charge of the new boss, and it was just a strange situation. And no, I think, and I then had another long injury, which eventually really retired me, because it was kind of never going to get better in the time frame that I needed it to. I remember at the end of that season, I was obviously out of contract, and I'd missed probably 6 or 7 months. I had a problem with my heel. And it actually turned out that the physio at the time, I'd had a scan and I'd had a tear in it, and he never told me. I had an injection in it, and the injection made it feel great, and I played a couple of games, and then it got worse, and it was like, you're making it up, the usual, having been through what I'd been through. And yet, again, it's difficult because if you've not got strong people in those positions, you're in trouble. So it got to the end of the season, I'd had like blood injections in it, I'd had all these different things, and it just never cured. And I went to actually called in a favour to go back to Man United to speak to a physio who had helped me when I was younger, and kind of his advice to me was how it had been treated was, you're going to need at least a year off, at least, and a year doing nothing, like just because of the where it was in the body, and the blood supply was so short. And because unless you go in a wheelchair, your feet are touching the ground every day, so I wouldn't have been able to live a normal life otherwise. So kind of when it got to that point, I knew this is, and as well, as I kind of said earlier, my ambition in football was to try and play at the highest level, not to just try and scrape by on a wage and go from club to club to try and just survive and find enough money coming in to pay the bills. It got to the point where I was never ever going to achieve what I wanted to, but I was thankfully I was always kind of done well academically, and I'd always like at Manchester, I wanted to go to Manchester earlier, and my mum and dad wouldn't let me, and I was not told in no uncertain terms if I didn't get the grades I was expected, I wouldn't be going. So things like that probably helped me later in life. So retired, and 26, kind of that was the end of my football career as I see it.
Exactly, as you see it. So you were lucky in the sense, as you say, you have that academic background behind you, and you've done a degree while you were down in Manchester. Obviously, you come back up the road and join Edinburgh City, and that's part-time. So you have that extra spare time on your hands. So then what have you done during it? Obviously, now you're at Galliford as well. So what have you done during that spare time, the other side of football?
Well, I was really fortunate that when I decided to kind of retire at the end of York, one of my kind of close friends, who was my financial advisor when I first met him when I was 15. When I moved to Manchester, I was introduced to him, and he'd kind of guided me, and not that I would earn the type of money that would do anything for him, but just as somebody to advise you properly, and who I'd known for 10 years. He was actually an usher at my wedding. Effectively offered me the opportunity to go and start a career with him. So when I look back now, it was very much take the time to think about it. It's a big decision. Football was all I'd ever known. And I look back now, I think it was the easiest decision I ever made. How I even had time to think about it. And to get a chance to, so he basically, I went and started to work, and go through my qualifications, etc. And really start on a new path. And it was a great opportunity to go into something. I was always interested in business. That was, I'd done a kind of degree in Manchester on business, and I never ever saw myself staying in football. Coaching had never appealed to me. I got more frustrated at myself, never mind watching other people. So football I'd had enough of, to be frank. So I was, for all the bad luck I potentially had in football, I had it all repaid back to me, because, and I think, the times that, he had a successful business for 10 years, and it probably wasn't the right time to take on somebody like myself. But I think because he knew my character, he knew I would work hard, he knew, having been so close to me throughout my career, the things I'd been through and how I'd reacted. So, for him, I think he thought, this is, an ideal person to give an opportunity to, and I'm very obviously grateful that he did. So for the last 4.5, 5 years, I'd done my initial qualifications, kind of sort of flew through them in a kind of crash course, to get myself up and running. And then last year, I'd been doing 2 years worth of a kind of master's degree in it to become chartered. So from last year, that was me kind of became chartered as a wealth manager, financial advisor, and in about 3.5 to 4 years. So I think there's only about 25,000 advisors in the UK, and only 20% of them are chartered. So I've kind of, the way I'd say to him is, I've made up for the 11 years I wasted playing football, by kind of throwing myself into this. And thankfully I've got myself kind of worked my way up over the last 4 or 5 years to get myself into a position where I'm kind of in my own head, where I potentially could have been had I went right into this from school. So and to answer the kind of the initial question, was that was 2 years where I just had no time, because I was also doing a university degree that I'd started at York in sports writing and broadcasting, which was funded through the PFA. So it was a good opportunity to get an honours degree, but not have to pay the full fees. Yeah. So my mum was forever on to me about having to let my brain start working again, because I just used to sit and play PlayStation and all that. So I've not done that for years. So I was doing that, and I was in my last year of that. So actually, when I started the job and my qualifications in financial advice, I was doing the kind of 9 to 5 for the first time, my last year in uni, my first year in financial advice, and I just had a wee boy, and I just moved back here. So that year was literally, I couldn't have juggled anymore. So football was the furthest thing from my mind. And it was 2 years I hadn't played for by the time I went to Edinburgh City, and that only just came about through, I was still going to see people about my feet, and things were starting to get a wee bit easier. But I was getting to the point where I kind of was advised that, maybe like at part-time and no training every day, I would be able to manage. So when one of my friends was at Edinburgh City and says, why don't you just come along? And I was, I'm not sure. Kind of, and I bet I was like, I've had enough of football, like, and everything I'd been through. I was just thinking, is it really worth it? But at the same time, deep down, I love football, and actually the thought of going into a football team, but in a situation where, see if tomorrow I've had enough, it's not going to impact my life.
Yeah.
That was a really powerful position to be in, because I'd only ever been in the position where I'd had the gun to my head and I had to do what I needed to do to pay my mortgage. So I kind of went, and I didn't want to sign. I just wanted to train and just get back to kind of feeling good, because as I say, 2 years I had never kicked a ball, and it flew by. And kind of 2 weeks into it, the manager, what do you think? And I knew deep down I didn't want to do it. I just not. And then, as usual, I just didn't want to let somebody down, and I got easily convinced. And so I says, right, I'll sign till the end of the season. And kind of the team had been going well, and at that point as well, I was probably fragile from a confidence point of view. I was just trying to find my feet, etc. And then that just became kind of, as I say, the travelling was a lot. And like a Saturday I'd be away to Elgin and Peterhead, and it was my wife's at home and my wee boy, and my job is no 9 to 5 as it is, so it's long days, and then the weekends to go away, kind of from 7 o'clock in the morning till 10 o'clock at night, whatever. Some of the journeys were really long. I just thought, and I think that the club at the time, say if I was a young player there, it would have been a great club, because they were wanting to do everything the right way. They were, I think ultimately they want to go full time. But for me, I've already done all that. I was going the other way, where I was wanting to take a step back and it just be part time. Like, I train on a Tuesday, train on a Thursday, play on a Saturday, and that's it. But this became like, you were getting sent videos, and if the players didn't watch the videos, the manager would take the huff and stuff like that. And and I wasn't the type of person that could just not do it, because I'm that way inclined. So I get sent a video, and I'd be on my lunch break looking at this video and that, just so that when the manager said who's watched the video, I could put my hand up. And it'd be, as I say, going back to the kind of the sort of injuries, it just became a chore. And I'm thinking, this is not for me. Like, I'm here to experience part-time, and football is not my priority anymore. And I was just like, no, this is not for me. And I didn't enjoy it. And that's when I kind of thought, nah, this is just not kind of be for me. And then clearly that was sort of in my mind, and there was only ever going to be probably one option that I would have took at that time, and that was to go home and play for Gala, because it meant something to me. It wasn't for anything else other than I felt I could give something back to where I grew up, and to help kind of progress a club who don't have very much. And a new manager had came in. I went to meet the manager, and I was kind of on the fence at the time whether I just call it a day completely. But I really liked what he had to say. He wanted to try and bring a new team together and play football the right way, and get and he obviously wanted me to kind of be key to that, and it became a bit of a kind of project. And if it wasn't where I grew up, I would never have done it. But because it was close to home, and my family are still down there, everybody bar my mum is still lives there. My dad used to go to some of the games anyway. My granddad lives 100 yards from the ground, and he'd followed me across Europe. So I almost felt like just to go and kind of give them something where rather than them having to take planes, trains and automobiles to watch me play football, they can just cross the road. So it was great, and I think it's no problem since I've went there that I've actually played football and enjoyed it. I remember when I was thinking about calling it a day, or when I did call it a day kind of professionally, my dad saying to me, when was the last time you enjoyed a game? I was racking my brains, because it just wasn't enjoyable. When you look at York, and we were struggling, and before that, and you're out of contract and everything. And probably Ireland, I really enjoyed it, but yet when I was in Ireland, all I could think about was, I need to get away from here. I need to get back down south. My career, I need to get there. I need to get here. Blah blah blah. And it's not until you come away and you think, I actually really enjoyed that. I wish I'd maybe stayed a bit longer and just played football in an environment where I was comfortable, I was playing well, I had a manager who, wanted me, which is the most important thing. So I think it really probably going back home and playing which really is part time, because that's the setup that's there, and everybody's got jobs, and everybody's kind of football is secondary, but everybody turns up looking to do the best. And for me to try and use my experience, and especially with a lot of young players in the team, try and bring them on, has been great. And clearly, the club has never been in a better position. So from my point of view, that it's like you've made a difference, and that's ultimately what you want, is to go and have a positive effect. And as I say, for a club that's probably got the third or fourth lowest budget in the league, to be competing against especially in the top half, kind of top six in the league, is punching well above our weight. So no, it really has been great, and it's most importantly got me back to playing football for the reasons that you play when you're growing up. And it's probably no coincidence that I've probably played as well as I've played, because you're just enjoying it, and it's no a chore, which it was for much of my career. I suppose I think it gives you your love back for the game, and reminds you why you love it in the first place.
That is a full circle, and it's one of those would have, could have, should have been stories. One final question: if there's one thing you could have told yourself, if it'd have been before Man United or when you were at Man United, just as that kid, what would it have been?
I think I think it's hard to pinpoint one thing, but I think it would have been to actually enjoy it. And because I spent so long, it was all about the next thing. It was never about the here and now. It's always about, I need to do this, I need to do this. Sometimes just take a step back and enjoy it. I mean, I look back now and I think, I've trained with Ronaldo, I've trained with Rooney, I've trained with Giggs, I've trained with Scholes, I've trained with some of the best players I've ever played. And at the time, would I said I enjoyed it? Probably, maybe a wee bit, but not to the degree what I should have. It's not until you kind of get a bit older and you look back and you think how fortunate you were. Like, I was so lucky to have those experiences. I've sit and think, the only thing I think when I think that is, injuries, bad times, negative, everything's doom and gloom. But, I went to a Champions League final 2 years on the bounce. I got to sit and watch John Terry miss a penalty at the early hours of the night in Moscow, and my team, Man United, win the Champions League. I mean, those experiences are the ones that you think, and maybe I could have had a drink on the flight back with everybody else, but I never. So I don't think I ever made the most of it. But I was just always so dedicated in terms of I can't get carried away. I need to be on this track and try and achieve the goal, which was for me was to play for Man United. That to be frank, that was what I set out to do. And anything below that was for me going to be a failure. And that's the way I look at it. Some people might think I'm being harsh or kind of criticising, but that was always the case for me. That was my goal when I set out, and unfortunately for me, I didn't achieve that. But I think it's important when you look back, and if I was to kind of give myself a bit of counsel years ahead of my time, then it would have been just to enjoy the moment and take it for what it is, rather than try to worry about what's next.
Well, Danny, it's been an absolute pleasure hearing your career. It's been one hell of a ride, and I've thoroughly enjoyed this. So thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you. Brilliant.